The laugh hit the room before the gavel did. Sharp. Loud. Confident. I didn't have to turn my head to know it was his. I was still standing in the doorway of the courtroom when my husband laughed. Really laughed. Like he was watching bad theater instead of the end of our marriage. The sound bounced off the polished stone walls, drawing a few curious glances from strangers who had no idea they were about to witness a man's certainty collapse in real time. I tightened my grip on the briefcase in my hand. It wasn't fancy. The leather was scuffed, the latch slightly bent, and the handle had softened from years of use. But it held everything he thought I didn't have. Proof. I stepped forward anyway. Each heel strike against the floor felt louder than the last. Not because the room was quiet, but because everyone was watching. The woman with no lawyer. The woman brave or foolish enough to represent herself against a man who walked in flanked by power, money, and 3 perfectly pressed suits. My husband sat at the defense table like he owned the room. Designer jacket. Gold cufflinks. The smug posture of someone who had never been told no and didn't expect today to be any different. He leaned toward his lead attorney, whispered something, and they both smirked like they were sharing a private joke. I already knew the punchline. She doesn't stand a chance. I met his eyes just long enough to let him see that I wasn't backing down. His smile widened. That was the moment I knew, really knew. He had underestimated me. What he didn't know was that the woman walking into that courtroom wasn't the same one he'd dismissed, silenced, or slowly erased from his story. That woman had cried in bathrooms, swallowed insults in silence, and convinced herself love meant sacrifice without recognition. This woman? This woman had spent months preparing. Quietly. Meticulously. Relentlessly. The bailiff called the room to order, and everyone rose as the judge entered. She moved with calm authority, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. The kind of woman who had seen lies dressed up as confidence and arrogance masquerading as truth more times than she could count. We took our seats. My husband's legal team stood in perfect unison when introductions were called. An orchestrated display of dominance. When it was my turn, I stood alone. My name is Alana Brooks, I said, my voice steady. I'll be representing myself. The whispers started immediately. I didn't look back. I could feel my husband watching me, amused, entertained. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, like he was settling in for a show he was certain would end in his favor. The judge warned me, kindly, that this wasn't a simple case. That I had the right to counsel. That representing myself was risky. I understand, I said. And I choose to proceed. That was when his smile faltered, just slightly. Not fear. Not yet. Confusion. His attorney began with confidence, laying out a narrative that painted my husband as a self-made success and me as a footnote. A supportive spouse. Minimal involvement. No entitlement. I listened quietly. I let them talk. Because when it was my turn, I didn't reach for notes. I reached for the truth. I told the court how I had been there from the beginning. Before the money. Before the success. Before his name meant anything to anyone. I told them about the nights we couldn't afford rent, the risks I took, the work I did without pay, without credit, without complaint. I watched my husband's expression change. Not all at once, but gradually. The smile faded first. Then the confidence. Then the color drained from his face when I opened my briefcase and placed the first stack of documents on the table. That was when he realized something was wrong. Very wrong. And as the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing with interest, I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposure. Because the man who laughed at me didn't realize the courtroom wasn't a stage. It was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. The first witness changed everything. Not because of what he said, but because of who he was. When I called his name, my husband stiffened beside his lawyers. It was subtle, the kind of reaction you only notice when you've spent years studying someone's tells. His jaw tightened. His fingers drummed once against the table, and then stopped. He recognized the name. Good. The man who stood from the gallery wasn't flashy. No expensive suit. No dramatic pause. Just a calm walk to the stand and the steady confidence of someone who knew the truth didn't need embellishment. He swore in, took his seat, and looked straight ahead. I approached slowly, heart pounding, but my voice stayed level. You worked at my husband's company during its early years, correct? Yes. And during that time, did you see me in the office? He didn't hesitate. All the time. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. He explained how I handled finances, managed client communications, corrected contracts, and kept the lights on while my husband chased growth and applause. He talked about late nights, weekends, and moments when the company nearly collapsed. Then he said the sentence my husband wasn't prepared for. He called her his partner. I watched my husband's attorney rise, object, then sit back down when the judge waved him off. I kept going. Do you remember the night payroll almost failed? The witness nodded slowly. I remember her bringing in her own money. She covered it. 2 months' worth. My husband shifted in his seat. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to, because the judge was already writing notes. When the witness stepped down, the air felt heavier, thicker, like something irreversible had started. Then came the second witness. Then the third. Each one told the same story from a different angle. Different moments. Different memories. Same conclusion. I wasn't invisible. I was foundational. By the time the court recessed, my husband's confidence had cracked completely. He approached me during the break, his voice low, urgent, trying to intimidate me the way he always had. You should have taken the deal, he hissed. This doesn't end well for you. I smiled, not because I was winning, but because for the first time in years, he wasn't in control. I already lost everything once, I said quietly. I survived it. I'll survive whatever happens here too. He walked away without another word. When court resumed, his lawyer called him to the stand. That's when the lies began. He spoke smoothly, calmly, confidently. He described himself as self-made, minimized my role, reduced years of labor into support. I listened patiently. Then it was my turn. I stood, walked to the podium, and asked him one question after another. Each answer boxed him in tighter. Each document I presented stripped away another layer of his story. When I asked him to prove he'd repaid the money I gave him, he couldn't. When I showed the original paperwork listing me as co-founder, his voice faltered. When I read his own emails back to him, his words praising my work, crediting my leadership, his composure finally shattered. The judge leaned forward. The courtroom went silent. And my husband realized something terrifying. The woman he thought he erased remembered everything. And she had the receipts. There's a moment in every confrontation when the truth stops being abstract and starts getting personal. For my husband, that moment came when the judge asked him to answer a question he couldn't charm his way out of. Did you ever repay the money your wife gave you? Silence. Not the thoughtful kind. Not the respectful kind. The exposed kind. I stood there, hands folded, watching the color drain from his face as he searched for an answer that didn't exist. His lawyer leaned forward, whispered something urgently, but it was too late. He finally spoke. Our finances were shared, he said. I paid for everything. I tilted my head slightly. That wasn't the question. The judge looked up sharply. I pressed on, my voice calm but firm. You testified that you repaid me. I've submitted bank statements from every account you controlled during that period. Can you point to a single transfer that supports your claim? He stared at the papers like they had betrayed him. I don't have those records in front of me. Of course you don't, I thought. Because if you did, you'd already be using them. The judge's pen paused mid-sentence. I moved to the next document. Let's talk about the business plan you filed in the early days. The one submitted to secure startup funding. I held it up. Can you explain why my name appears on it as co-founder and financial lead? He swallowed. It was a formality. A few people in the gallery scoffed before the bailiff shushed them. A formality, I repeated. So when you needed credibility, I was useful. But now that the company is successful, I was just your wife. His jaw tightened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I read his own words aloud. Emails he'd written years ago. Messages thanking me for holding everything together when he wanted to quit. Messages calling me the backbone of the operation. When I finished, I looked at him. Did you write those? Yes, he muttered. That was it. That was the crack that split everything open. Because once the mask slips, it never goes back on the same way. I asked about the timing. About why my name disappeared from documents months before he filed for divorce. About why he suddenly decided to professionalize the company right after he quietly rewrote its history. He snapped. You didn't build it, he said sharply. You helped. There's a difference. The room froze. Even his lawyer looked uncomfortable. I stepped closer to the stand, close enough that he couldn't avoid my eyes. I was just there, I said softly, repeating his words. Just there when you thought you'd failed. Just there when payroll couldn't be met. Just there when you needed someone to believe in you. His hands clenched around the armrest. The judge didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. When I finished, I returned to my seat without another word. The silence afterward was louder than any argument. During the recess, my hands finally started shaking. Adrenaline, exhaustion, relief, fear. All tangled together. That's when she approached me. An older woman. Confident. Elegant. Watching me like she'd been waiting for this moment. I'm an attorney, she said quietly. And I've been watching your case. I told her I couldn't afford help. She smiled. I'm not asking you to pay. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't charity. It was recognition. When court resumed, my husband's confidence was gone. Completely. He whispered furiously to his lawyers, but the damage had already been done. Because now the judge wasn't just listening. She was seeing. And once a judge sees the pattern, there's no going back. The second hearing felt different the moment I walked in. Not louder. Not more dramatic. Sharper. The room was packed. Whispers buzzing low. Eyes tracking every movement. My husband sat straighter than before. Jaw clenched. Suit immaculate but strained. Like armor worn too long. He didn't look at me. Not once. I wasn't alone this time. She sat beside me. The attorney who had stepped forward when I needed help the most. Calm. Focused. Unimpressed by theatrics. She didn't speak much before we began. She didn't need to. The stack of folders she arranged on the table spoke for her. When the judge entered, she didn't waste time. She had questions. The kind that don't come from curiosity, but from pattern recognition. My attorney stood and introduced evidence my husband never thought would surface. Structures hidden behind bland names. Accounts designed to delay, divert, disguise. Amendments filed quietly. Beneficiaries removed carefully. Too carefully. Because careful people leave trails. As the documents were handed up, I watched my husband's confidence dissolve. His lawyer tried to object, weakly, but the judge waved him down. She was already reading. Already understanding. When my husband was called back to the stand, his hands shook just enough to notice. The judge asked him directly if he'd removed my name from certain assets in anticipation of divorce. He denied it. But denial is fragile when paper tells a different story. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out timelines. Dates. Amendments filed just months before separation. Communications that revealed intent without ever using the word divorce. Planning. Protection. Erasure. The judge leaned back, eyes never leaving him. What you're describing, she said slowly, is not organization. It's concealment. That's when I saw it. Fear. Real fear. My husband tried to explain. Tried to reframe. Tried to justify. But the more he talked, the clearer it became that he wasn't explaining actions. He was exposing motives. The judge stopped him mid-sentence. She turned to me. She acknowledged my preparation. My composure. The courage it took to stand alone when everything was stacked against me. I felt my throat tighten. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Then she ruled. Not just in my favor, but decisively. Half of everything. The company. The accounts. The assets he thought were invisible. Full disclosure required. Strict timelines. Consequences spelled out clearly. When the gavel struck, it didn't sound loud. It sounded final. The room reacted. Gasps, whispers, a few claps quickly silenced. But I didn't move. I just sat there, stunned. Because for the first time in years, someone with power had said what I'd known all along. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated it. I hadn't deserved to be erased. As we stood to leave, I caught my husband's eye. His smile was gone. So was everything else he'd been so sure of. And in that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The first thing I noticed after the ruling wasn't the applause. It wasn't the gasps. It wasn't even my husband sitting there like someone had unplugged his soul. It was his lawyer. The man who'd strutted into court like a peacock on opening day was now shoving papers into his briefcase like it had personally betrayed him. He didn't look at me. Didn't nod. Didn't smirk. He packed. Quickly. I almost laughed. Almost. Because my husband, the same man who'd laughed when he saw me representing myself, was still sitting there, frozen, staring straight ahead like the judge might reverse herself if he didn't blink. Spoiler alert. She did not. When we stepped into the hallway, reporters swarmed like this was the season finale of a show nobody wanted spoiled. Microphones appeared from nowhere. Someone asked how it felt to beat the odds. I smiled. It feels, I said carefully, like accountability finally showed up to work. Behind me, my husband slipped out a side door. No cámaras. No comments. No confidence. Funny how that works. A few days later, the money started moving. Slowly. Painfully. With paperwork so thick it could have doubled as gym equipment. Every asset had to be disclosed. Every account opened. Every clever little hiding place dragged into the light like a bad haircut from the early 2000s. He hated it. I loved that for him. The calls started coming in too. Old colleagues. Former employees. People who'd watched me work for years but never realized how badly I'd been cut out of the picture. One woman said, "I always wondered why your name disappeared." So did I, ma'am. So did I. Meanwhile, my husband tried damage control. He sent one email. Just one. It said, "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Because happiness wasn't the point. Peace was. With my share secured, I moved into a small place that actually felt like mine. No echoing rooms filled with resentment. No reminders of being told I was just support. I celebrated quietly. Sparkling cider. Takeout I didn't have to justify. Music he used to complain about turned all the way up. I toasted myself. To the woman who kept receipts. A few months later, I opened my own office. Nothing flashy. Warm walls. A team of women who knew what it felt like to be overlooked. Underestimated. Spoken over. On opening day one of them asked, "So? How did you know you'd win?" I laughed. "Oh, I didn't," I said. "I just knew I was done losing." The real humor came later. A mutual friend told me my ex now introduces himself as a private consultant. Apparently, former CEO who lost half his empire in divorce court didn't fit on business cards. Tragic. As for me, I sleep well. I laugh easily. And every now and then, when I think back to that courtroom, him laughing, me standing there alone, I smile. Because the funniest part of the whole story? He thought the joke was on me. Turns out I was just delivering the punchline. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.